This episode's sponsored by CuriosityStream, which now comes free with Nebula. Details are in the description box below. Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and it's been a while since I've done a musical biopic, the last one being Amadeus, so I figured for the next one, what could be better than Bohemian Rhapsody? In this film, we follow the rise of one of the greatest, or arguably, the greatest rock band of all time, Queen. From their formation in 1970 until their legendary performance at Live Aid in 1985. All of it seen through the eyes of its lead singer, Freddie Mercury, before his untimely death from AIDS in 1991. Fans of Queen have waited years to see a movie about their favourite band, hoping that it would cover everything from the inception of its greatest hits to a glimpse of the wild lives of these titan rock stars. But is this what we got in the end? Did this film try to tell the true story of Queen, warts and all, or is this simply a $50 million sing-along concert, with our favourite songs being played instead by Hollywood actors? Generally, biopics tend to be less accurate than the average historical film, especially when the surviving band members are the movie's consultants, and might want to protect their legacy. Which is fine, I guess, at least to a point. So what I'll be doing in this review is to go over some of the movie's inaccuracies, from the minor stuff to the risque things they left out because they wanted a PG-13 rating, to of course the big changes that are a little hard to justify, especially once you get to know the true story behind Queen. This is Bohemian Rhapsody. So the movie begins, funnily enough, with a flash forward to the very end of the movie. It is the 13th of July 1985, one of the truly pivotal moments of rock history. This was the day of Live Aid, a charity concert to raise relief for the Ethiopian famine. But unlike other concerts over the years, this was the biggest and most iconic since Woodstock of 1969. Anyone who was anyone from the music world was there that day. For 16 hours, 58 bands performed consecutively in London and Philadelphia. All of it captured live on the largest satellite broadcast ever made at that time, with an estimated 1.6 billion people watching it worldwide. This would be Queen's magnum opus, but the way it's portrayed in the movie, it was just another day for Freddie Mercury. With him waking up that one morning, feeding the bajillion cats he owned, hopping into his Rolls Royce with an unusually calm demeanor that says only one thing. This is a professional in his element, knowing as he leaps fearlessly onto the stage that he and his bandmates will be giving this audience the performance of a lifetime. And it's at this point that the movie truly begins, with a flashback 15 years earlier to 1970, where we see Freddie working as a humble baggage handler at Heathrow Airport. Which is true, he did briefly work there as a teenager, but this was back in 1964, when his family first moved to England. The reason for the date change is because Queen formed in 1970, and the movie just wanted to crack on with it. That being said, I don't know why they picked Freddie's first job, but what's really funny is that once Heathrow Airport found out the movie was going to mention this, they chose to cash in with a cringy dance tribute.
I want to break free. I want to break free.
I love how out of all the songs they could have picked, they chose that one. I also wonder if Heathrow Airport actually watched Bohemian Rhapsody beforehand. Would they still have done the tributes based on how their baggage handlers were represented?
Wait, you missed one, Packy. I'm not from Pakistan.
Yeah, somehow I doubt it. For those of you who don't know, that is an incredibly racist term in the UK and unfortunately appropriate to the time period. There was a huge influx of immigration going on in the 60s, which Freddie's family was a part of. Before Freddie Mercury changed his name, he was originally called Farrukh Balsara and was born in the African spice island of Zanzibar. The Balsaras were Parsi Indians who fled to England in 1964 to escape civil unrest. Like we see in the movie, Freddie's parents didn't fully accept his dream to be a musician yet. They both hoped that this was merely a phase and that he would eventually grow out of it someday to get a proper job. We then follow Freddie to a student pub where he watches a band called Smile play. Two of its members would be the future lead guitarist and drummer of Queen, Brian May and Roger Taylor, and it's here that the movie tries to condense a lot of Queen history in just one scene. And you can't blame the filmmakers too much for that. Basically, the movie's version of Freddie meets Brian and Roger for the first time and says he's been following Smile for a while and would like to contribute some songs he's written. And it just so happens that the lead singer Tim Staffel quit that very night to join another band.
Humpy Bong.
Humpy Bong. They're going places, they're gonna be big.
Humpy Bong? Are you joking?
We're not going anywhere with this. What, college gigs, pubs? Gotta give it a go.
Now, it's true that Tim Staffel left Smile in 1970 because they played the college circuit for 2 years, and the closest they got to success was a single they released a year earlier with Mercury Records that went absolutely nowhere. Feeling jaded, Staffel accepted an offer by ex-Bee Gees drummer Colin Peterson to join Humpy Bong, who had recently been on the music show Top of the Pops, so you could see why Staffel dropped out. Anyway, with him out of the picture, we see Freddie take a shot to audition for Brian and Roger.
I know what I'm doing. I got a feeling I should be doing all right. Doing all right.
It's a quick little scene that moves things along, but it isn't how the band formed. It was actually Tim Staffel who introduced Freddie to Brian and Roger. They were both friends from Ealing College of Art, and in early 1969, Staffel brought Freddie to a Smile rehearsal, and he immediately clicked with Brian and Roger and became a regular at their gigs. Freddie loved Smile's sound and gave constant feedback on how the band should look and perform on stage.
I used to follow sort of Smile a lot, you know, I used to see, we were like friends, I used to go to their shows.
And he would always say, you know, you guys are brilliant, 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 it's amazing, but, you know, you should do this and you should do this.
What did you see in what Brian and Roger were doing with Smile?
Nothing.
I think he sort of had in the back of his mind maybe, you know, some idea about maybe working with us.
Inspired by Smile, Freddie set about finding his own band to join. There was Ibex, Sour Milk Sea, Wreckage, but they never went anywhere. So when Staffel left Smile, it only made sense that Brian, Freddie and Roger start an entirely new band, one that Freddie would call Queen. We also see earlier in this scene Freddie supposedly meeting the brief love of his life, Mary Austin, on the same night he meets Brian and Roger, which also isn't true. In reality, Mary went on a couple of dates with Brian May, but nothing ever happened. So Freddie met Mary through Brian, and that's how their relationship began. Well, maybe not initially. Apparently it took Freddie 6 months to pick up the courage to ask her out. But I will say that it is true that she worked at Bieber, which was a high street boutique back in the 70s, and she and Freddie were very much into the Kensington fashion scene.
I love your style. I think we should all take more risks.
These intimate moments with Mary may have helped inspire him with some of the more outlandish outfits he later wore in his career.
We've got a few fresh faces. This is John Deacon, our bass player. Yeah, and our new lead singer, Freddie Balsara. Freddie Balsara.
So this is meant to be Queen's first ever performance, and there's a couple of things to mention. Although we see John Deacon on stage, he wasn't the original bass player but the fourth, and I completely agree why that was left out, as it took Queen 10 months of stressful searching before they got lucky with John. The other thing to mention is that by the time Queen formed, Freddie had long overcome his shyness and awkwardness on stage.
Keep yourself alive.
Freddie's performance here is more of how he used to be with his previous band Ibex. In one show, he sang with his back to the crowd, kind of like the way Jim Morrison used to do in the early days of The Doors.
Turn around, man. Come on, let him in, Jim.
But it didn't take long for Freddie to find his confidence, and soon he was leaping up and down the stage the way we used to seeing him. As for the bottom of Freddie's mic falling out, that did happen during a show, but that was also with Ibex, and ever since then Freddie only performed with the top pole section, and that became his trademark style. The movie then cuts to a year later in 1971, where Queen has been touring up and down the UK, but meeting little success, which was true. Many of their gigs were at small town festivals, pubs and colleges, but what the band really felt they should be doing were the big concerts. In the movie, Freddie suggests they go about this by selling off Roger's van so they can book a studio to record an album, and apparently they do this all in one night.
Don't you think I sound like shit?
No, it's good.
Can we try it again?
Sure, yep. Sure, it's your money.
The truth is they didn't need to pay for a session because a friend of Brian May's was setting up a new recording studio called the Lane Lee, and he offered Queen free time to record their demo, not an entire album as the movie says. The reason why was because the studio wanted a loud band to test their equipment. So, obviously Queen said yes because they knew their demo would not only sound professional, but it would also be a chance to network. Sometime around the end of 1971, the band was at the Lane Lee when a couple of producers from Trident Studios overheard them playing.
Well, I'll tell you, these kids in the box.
Student band doing some weird stuff.
How about demos? You got some?
Been up all night, mate.
Now, in the movie, that guy was a talent scout for the record label EMI, and when the band are later having lunch with family, Freddie gets a call from EMI saying they wish to sign up the band and have John Reid, Elton John's manager, represent them. But the movie is seriously jumping the gun here, because John Reid didn't become their manager until 1975. It was Norman Sheffield from Trident Studios who managed them from 1971 until 1975, and with Trident Studios, Queen produced 3 albums that made a lot of money. So why is there no mention of Queen's first manager? Because they naively signed a contract that for £50 a week, the bulk of their record sales went to Trident Studios.
And we explained to them at length that money wasn't there yet. It would be there. We could see it coming. If the sales were like they were reported to be, it would flow.
So being constantly broke, they felt they were being ripped off when Roger saw their manager had bought a second Rolls Royce. That's why if you listen to their song Death on Two Legs, it's actually a diss track meant to slag off Norman Sheffield.
You suck my blood like a leech. You break the law and you breach. You screw my brain till it hurts. You've taken all my money and you want more.
Furious with this, Norman Sheffield threatened to sue the band for defamation, but in the end everything was settled out of court, thanks largely to Queen's second manager John Reid and their lawyer Jim Beach. But in the movie, John Reid's character is the one who discovers Queen and breaks them out to the public. He goes about this by getting them on Top of the Pops, which was a huge TV music chart show on BBC One. Now, Queen did appear on Top of the Pops, which was on the 21st of February 1974, but unlike in the movie where they're playing Killer Queen, the original song was Seven Seas of Rye, but most of that footage was lost in the BBC archives. Killer Queen was their second appearance, and that was the one most people saw, so they probably changed it so fans wouldn't get confused. Which is fine, it's a minor detail, but if there's one thing I need to talk about in this scene, it is this.
I understand that it's the policy of the BBC.
We have procedures.
This is shit.
I need you to explain it to the band,
Okay, well,
please.
let's make it quick.
Ready, boys?
Look, chaps, it is going to be playback. Lip sync's all that's required.
We do know how to play our instruments.
You want me to lip sync?
I don't understand why we can't simply perform live.
The audience will never know the difference.
I can't believe I have to defend the BBC on this, but there's an actual reason why they need to mime their song. This was a music charts TV show that had bands playing back to back to back. There was very little time for each band to get set up and make sure all their instruments and mics were properly balanced. Wouldn't be surprised if they only had 7 minutes or something. And when you were dealing with BBC sound engineers who you don't know and aren't familiar with how your band likes doing things, then there's a chance of something going wrong. Like the time New Order refused to mime Blue Monday on Top of the Pops in 1983.
How does it feel when you treat me like you do? And you laid your hands upon me.
Sounds awful, doesn't it? That's why if you don't have enough time to do your sound checks, it's often safer just to mime it. Anyway, why am I mentioning this? Because the impression of the BBC in the movie is that not only are they lame and uncool for not allowing Queen to play live, but they don't even tell them until they're on stage, which just wasn't true. In order to be on Top of the Pops, Queen had to record a special backing track the day before. Now, of course they prefer to do it live, and I'm sure they complained, but they understood why.
Well, the way things are done are a load of bollocks, old chap. This is the BBC.
I'm relieved.
Well, you would be.
Like, perfect performance.
Exactly. And out of that perfect performance, Seven Seas of Rye reached number 10 in the UK charts. From the achievements made from that hit single and their debut album, Queen toured America for the first time as a support act for Mott the Hoople. And like we see in the movie, the tour was an enormous success. And by December 1974, their third album, Sheer Heart Attack, reached the top 10 in the US charts. The movie then cuts to a meeting where Queen is pitching their fourth album, A Night at the Opera, which is generally regarded as their finest album. Joining them is their lawyer Jim Beach, John Reid, and EMI executive Ray Foster. Now, Ray Foster's character is fictional, but he's supposed to be loosely based on Roy Featherston, who was the general manager of the pop division at EMI. In reality, this character is a composite of several EMI execs, basically anyone who questioned Queen's vision, and they're kind of being made fun of here. That's why Ray Foster is portrayed to be unimaginative.
Formulas are a complete and utter waste of time.
Formulas work. Let's stick with the formulas. I like formulas.
Uncultured.
Are you aware that no one actually likes opera?
I like opera.
Do you?
I do.
And most importantly, unadventurous.
Surely a man of your unique taste isn't afraid of little risk.
Please don't make me regret this.
Now, I know this is supposed to be all tongue-in-cheek, but the idea of Queen needing permission to record their fourth album is ridiculous. Not only was the real Roy Featherston a huge fan, but EMI had already spent considerable time and money in breaking them out of their previous contract. They even advanced Queen £100,000 so they could pay Trident the severance package.
To cut a very long story short, we agreed that we would go with John Reid as our manager. And John Reid's plan, you know, because we said, you know, how do we get out of this? His plan was, okay, boys, I will deal with the financial situation. You guys go back in the studio and make the best album you've ever made.
As you can see, Queen was free to make any kind of album they wanted. All they had to do was make sure it didn't suck, which is a lot of pressure on a band, especially when that band is broke and in debt. Basically, if A Night at the Opera failed, then Queen would have broken up. That was the real drama going on with the making of this album, not this little speech Freddie's character has about opera.
We call the album A Night at the Opera. It's a rock and roll record with the scale of opera, the pathos of Greek tragedy, the wit of Shakespeare, the unbridled joy of musical theatre.
I'm sorry, but I have no clue what he's on about. The only operatic song in that entire album is Bohemian Rhapsody. The rest are your traditional Queen songs. The only reason why it's called A Night at the Opera is because it's named after a movie.
One of the key memories I have is we were all sitting up one Saturday night with nothing better to do than watch A Night at the Opera by the Marx Brothers, and we were big Marx Brothers fans. We'd been sort of thinking of things to call the album, etc., etc. And then suddenly there it was there right in front of us, A Night at the Opera.
This didn't only happen once, by the way. The next album is also named after a Marx Brothers movie called A Day at the Races. There's even a picture of them giving Groucho Marx a gold disc as a thank you. In any case, Queen set out to record their album in August 1975 and headed to Rockfield Studios in Wales. Now, this converted farm may look like EMI was being cheap, but I can assure you, this was one of the best studios in Europe, and the fact that you could sleep there made it even better. For 2 weeks, these guys lived and worked together in complete isolation, and this led to some colourful arguments about their songs. One in particular the movie mentions was Roger Taylor's I'm in Love with My Car.
What does that even mean, not strong enough?
I'm late. What did I miss?
Discussing Roger's car song.
Is it strong enough? That's all I'm asking. When my hand's on your grease gun, that's very subtle,
It's
isn't
a
it?
metaphor, Brian.
It's just a bit weird, Roger. What exactly are you doing with that car?
So, according to Queen myth, Roger got the last laugh in the end by locking himself in a cupboard and refused to come out until his bandmates agreed that his song, I'm in Love with My Car, would be on the B-side of the Bohemian Rhapsody single.
What happens is, when it comes to getting paid, the record royalties for writing the tracks are split 50-50 between the A-side and the B-side, which is clearly an unfair situation, but that's the way it was. So I'm in Love with My Car became one of the biggest earners in terms of a song of all time.
He's not joking, by the way. Bohemian Rhapsody is the third best-selling British single of all time, so Roger got a crap load of money. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the making of Bohemian Rhapsody. Now, I'm happy to say that this scene stays very close to history. This was a monster of a track to make, and because it took 6 studios to put it together, everyone only heard bits and pieces of it. The only one who knew how it was all going to sound in the end was Freddie Mercury.
So now what?
This is when the operatic section comes in.
Oh, the operatic section, yeah.
The process of splicing it all together was apparently so taxing in the original tape, you could hold it up to the light and see through it because the oxide had worn off. Everything was quickly transferred, of course, but Brian May himself said that every time Freddie added another Galileo, they lost something.
Jesus, how many more Galileos do you want?
Freddie wants to do a few more overdubs.
Do we even have any tape left?
I do have to say, the tape is wearing out.
Dub 26 of Fred's thing.
One more. One more. Again.
It took over 3 weeks just to cut Bohemian Rhapsody. As for Night at the Opera, it was rumoured to be the most expensive album ever made at that time, running at a cost of £40,000, which was unheard of. But that wasn't what troubled EMI the most. It was the fact that Queen unanimously decided that Bohemian Rhapsody would be the next single. For a band that always argued over every little thing, they were oddly united on this issue, and very few people at EMI could understand why.
It goes on forever, 6 bloody minutes.
Pity your wife if you think 6 minutes is forever.
Not possible. Anything over 3 minutes and the radio stations won't program it, period.
Bohemian Rhapsody. That's it.
Or we walk.
Okay, this is just crap. Freddie and the rest of Queen never threatened to walk in protest because they couldn't afford to. The success of their next album was make or break for them. The film gives the impression that Queen were already superstars by this point, but that hadn't happened yet. They were just a popular rock band with enormous potential. Also, it wasn't just one guy at EMI saying no, pretty much everyone was telling them it was a bad idea.
I was the idiot who said, why don't we ask them to do an edit? And the response was a couple of words.
I played it to Elton John at the time, and he said, "Are you off your head? You'll never get that on the radio."
Fortunately for Freddie, he just so happened to be friends with a radio DJ called Kenny Everett. The way it's presented in the movie is that Freddie came on Capital Radio and gave Kenny a copy of Bohemian Rhapsody live on air and cheekily told him not to play it.
No one will play it on the radio, so EMI won't release it.
What's wrong with this song?
Nothing's wrong with it at all, except that it's 6 minutes long.
6 minutes?
You'd have to be mad to play it.
You'd have to be bonkers.
Positively forbidden.
Let's hear it.
Now, it's not clear how Kenny managed to get a copy because there have been conflicting stories over the years. One is that Brian May claimed that Kenny stole it and played it on the radio without the band's consent. Another one is that Roy Thomas Baker, Queen's producer, said they gave it to Kenny knowing full well what he was going to do.
We invited Kenny Everett along and he listened to it. And we gave him a copy and we said, whatever you do, you can't play this. And he said, okay, I won't play it. And winked. And then that following weekend, he played it like 14 times.
The one thing I can say is that whilst Freddie appeared on Kenny's show before, he wasn't on that particular broadcast, but in the end, it doesn't really matter. The chemistry between these two characters is very authentic to what their real friendship was like, but regardless of how Kenny got a hold of Bohemian Rhapsody, it can't be denied that he helped turn it into a smash hit. EMI was shocked by the overwhelming positive response, forcing their hand to release it officially on the 31st of October 1975. Their fears that no radio station would play it all the way through were unfounded. The single went platinum and held on to the #1 charts for 9 weeks and sold 1 million copies in the UK alone. Queen's rise to superstardom had begun. Since I have your attention, I thought I'd mention quickly that whilst my Bohemian Rhapsody review will be split up into parts 1 and 2 on YouTube, you can watch it in its entirety right now on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service made by creators where we release content early, ad-free, and even show exclusive Nebula originals that you can't find anywhere else. It's also a platform without the restrictions of advertiser-friendly policies you'd find elsewhere. So basically, any videos of mine that need to be heavily edited or go missing will have no problem being uploaded to Nebula, the way they were meant to be seen. And what's more is that Nebula comes free with CuriosityStream, which is a subscription streaming service that has nothing on it but documentaries, including history. And you can get them both for just 26% off the annual plan. That's less than $15 for an entire year of content. So if you want to watch the full Bohemian Rhapsody review right now for free, just go over to curiositystream.com/historybuffs. If I had to pick one missed opportunity in this movie, it would have to be this one. It's that brief moment where we see all the scathing reviews of Bohemian Rhapsody when it released. Given the success of the single, it's almost funny to see out of touch these critics were, but it barely scratches the surface of just how much the music press loved to hate on Queen, especially when they did so well because then they took it personally. So given how the movie glosses over this fascinating bit of Queen history, I figured why not mention it quickly here. Now, to be fair, the music press wasn't fixated on only hating Queen. It was pretty much anyone who was popular back then.
We were taking, if you like, music icons at that time, and we were rubbishing them, basically.
The music icons he's talking about are bands like The Who, Pink Floyd, and so on. The decision to rubbish them had nothing to do with the quality of their music, but just because it was cool to. By the mid-1970s, a new genre of music blasted onto the scene called punk, and it was loud, it was crude, it was vulgar, it was anti-establishment, anti-authority, it was not my cup of tea. Especially that gulping stuff. Ugh. Anyway, a lot of British journalists hyped up the punk scene as best they could because they felt it reflected society, and they did this by making its anti-fashion fashionable, glamorizing its nihilistic message, writing articles about how rock was dead, and bands like Led Zeppelin, The Who, and the Rolling Stones were a bunch of has-beens, and they especially hated Queen for being a bunch of posh boys, and giving their albums such names like A Night at the Opera, A Day at the Races. To these journalists, they conjured up images villages of the elite, with their funny hats and glasses of champagne, so Queen were deemed to be snobs, which I find funny coming from a bunch of champagne anarchists. The journalists, I mean, not the punk bands. However, the American press wasn't any better. Listen to this from the Rolling Stone in their review of the album Jazz. Queen may be the first truly fascist rock band. The whole thing makes me wonder why anyone would indulge these creeps and their polluting ideas. Anyway, John Reid, Queen's manager, understood this and tried his best to keep the band out of the media's crosshairs, and one story in particular inspired a small scene in the movie Bohemian Rhapsody.
So I went out to dinner with Freddie in the White Elephant in Curzon Street. Casually in the middle of dinner, he said, I did an interview with David Wigg from The Express today. I said, I thought I told you no interviews, without clearing it with me. Oh, well, dear, never mind. I said, well, fuck you. If you don't work within my rules, you don't work with me. And I got up and I left him there. I came home, went upstairs, turned on the TV. The next thing I knew, a brick came through the window.
Christ!
And I looked outside here, as Freddie standing in the street, hands on his hips. Don't you ever fucking leave me in a... I thought you better come in.
Now, as funny as that story may be, we mustn't forget why John Reid was so cautious. In a famous article by New Music Express, a journalist called Tony Stewart interviewed Freddie Mercury, quoted him saying that he wanted to bring ballet to the masses and represented him in the worst possible way.
That was obviously an article I wrote called Is This Man a Prat?, where people were left to answer the questions themselves, and I think there was a resounding yes from NME's audience of 250,000.
Ah, so it's like if I ask my audience if they think you're a I'm not saying you're a I'm just asking them if they think you're a Okay, honestly, I have nothing against Tony Stewart. I just find this style of journalism to be childish. Yet this was the kind of grief Queen were used to dealing with throughout their career. You get a little sense of that with the negative reviews for Bohemian Rhapsody, but I think the film could have shown more. In any case, let's get back to the movie. After the success of A Night at the Opera, we see a montage of all their greatest tours in the 70s. Well, supposedly anyway. Funnily enough, it ends with Queen in Rio de Janeiro, about to perform in the first ever Rock in Rio festival.
According to Brian, it was the largest paying audience in history.
It certainly was. On the 2 nights the Queen played, up to 300,000 people attended. Some sources even claim it was as many as 470,000 on their first night, making it the largest audience Queen would ever play to. However, this landmark gig didn't happen until January 1985, not in the 70s as shown in the movie. And this is something that happens a lot in Bohemian Rhapsody, where they'll take key moments in Queen history and present them out of order. In this case, it's because the filmmakers wanted a scene where Freddie shows Mary Austin this enormous crowd singing Love of My Life while they're still together.
They're all singing. Thousands of them. All singing to you.
Freddie, what's wrong?
Now, I will admit that this is one of the better scenes in the movie, even if it isn't 100% accurate. It was 1976 when Freddie came out to Mary, which ended their 6-year relationship, and the way his character uses his music as a way to reach her does feel very Freddie. The fact that it's Queen's largest gig, where allegedly 500,000 fans are singing Love of My Life to Mary through the TV, makes it even more powerful. Freddie had been conflicted for years with his sexual identity, and admitting this to Mary must have been incredibly difficult, because he genuinely loved her and didn't want things to end.
No, don't take it off. Don't take it off. You promised me you'd never take it off.
What do you want from me?
I want you in my life.
It's a very well done scene. Even if this particular concert didn't happen until 1985, it isn't a huge deal breaker for me. As long as it's authentic, feels true to history, then that's something I'm willing to get behind. Anyway, after that scene, the movie jumps forward to 1980, where Freddie has done away with the painted nails and long hair in favor of the mustache he's best known for. And it's here that we see him throw one of his epic parties that has literally become the stuff of rock and roll legend. Well, at least it's supposed to be. To be honest, what we see on the screen is very underwhelming. Like, the environment doesn't quite fit what the characters are saying.
Where's Mary?
It's not exactly her scene, is it, Freddie?
What, this boring house party?
Fabulous, isn't it?
If you say so.
Come on! Let's dance.
Yes! I don't dance, Freddie.
Does anyone think that Brian May is a bit of a buzzkill here? Because there's nothing crazy enough going on for him to act like such a fun sponge. I'm sorry, but this is not a Queen party. Now this is a Queen party. In real life, they're all expenses paid hedonistic bashers with burlesque dancers, strippers, hookers, drag queens, half-naked butlers, naked mud wrestlers, with people shagging under tables, hopped up on booze, drugs, you name it. And that's only the stuff the band is willing to admit. Then there's the other stories.
The story of the dwarves with the cocaine was a myth that went round, and certainly when I discussed it with Freddie, he never denied it. He would just laugh about it. So clearly there was some shenanigans going on with dwarves.
It sounds good to have a dwarf walking round with a bowl of cocaine on his head, doesn't it?
Yeah, I never saw one of those. Probably all gone by the time I got there.
If this film had been R-rated and we saw debauchery, drugs, sex and the rest of it, then that would have justified the dialogue. But no, they wanted a PG-13 rating so these rock stars look like wet blankets. It also slightly undermines their concern for Freddie's well-being and the crowds he was with. In this case, Paul Prenter, who is pretty much the movie's villain. He was Freddie's personal manager and been working for him since 1977, and the rest of the band hated this guy. They felt he was a bad influence and pushed Freddie to go out clubbing every night, hooking up with coke, with men, and being overall very possessive of Freddie. That's why you always see him hovering around him in the movie, and this does seem to be genuine. If you look at the real footage of Paul Prenter, he's often touching Freddie or clinging to him. At one point, you even see Freddie telling him to outright stop it, but what the rest of the band hated most was Prenter influencing Freddie creatively.
I'm tired of the bloody anthems. I want the energy in the clubs, the bodies. I want to make people move.
You mean disco? Why not? Do you mind pissing off?
Now, whatever Paul Prenter may have been, I don't think he was quite the evil genius the movie makes him out to be. There's a scene where he suggests to John Reeds that Freddie should perhaps leave Queen to start a solo career.
You mean Queen? How long can that last?
And since John was Queen's manager, he should be the one to propose it. So John Reed mentions later that CBS Records was interested in hiring Freddie for a solo album, which they were, but this didn't happen until a few years later. However, John Reed quickly discovers that this was all just a trap.
It's a lot of money for you, Fred, and I think you should consider it.
Are you asking me to break up the band?
Paul?
I don't know what you're talking about, John.
So in a fit of fury, Freddie fires John Reed on the spot and kicks him out of the car. Then we see Paul Prenter lie and say that he even warned John not to do it, which is a slimy thing to do, but in real life, none of this ever happened. The reason for John Reed's departure was far less melodramatic. It was simply because it was coming up to the end of his contract and the band wanted to manage themselves. At the time, John Reed was also managing Elton John's career, and they felt his focus wasn't 100% on them. So in 1977, they told Reed they appreciated everything he had done for them, but they felt it was time to part ways and offered a severance package to end the contract early.
I thought that was a very nice way to tell me, and it was the correct way to tell me, and I've never had any difficulty with them at all. It's been one of the gentlest parting of the ways of anybody I've ever worked with.
Yeah, so the complete opposite of what we see in the movie. As far as inaccuracies go, it's not good, but it's nowhere near as bad as this one. It's when Queen are discussing MTV's decision to ban their music video, I Want to Break Free, which featured the entire band dressed in drag. It was a parody of a boring British soap called Coronation Street, which was lost on Americans, and I don't blame them, seeing how it's the most boring music intro of all time. I mean, look at this, even the cat's falling asleep. Anyway, MTV's banning of the video didn't happen until 1984, but the film changes it to 1982 because that was a particularly stressful year for Queen. Their album Hot Space didn't do so well, and they were constantly at each other's throats. Well, more than usual, but that's normal for a band that's been on tour for like a decade. But rather than just admit that everyone was feeling burnt out, the film chooses this approach. When Freddie says that he wants to take a break to focus on a solo career, the entire band goes mental. Now, it is true they were pissed at Freddie for getting paid more from CBS than what EMI was paying them, but what isn't true is this crap that Freddie broke up Queen by going solo.
You just killed Queen.
Oh, give it a kiss one day. She might wake up.
You need us, Freddie. More than you know.
I don't need anyone.
In real life, it wasn't just Freddie who wanted a break, it was something they all agreed to do. And none of them had an issue with Freddie going solo because he wasn't even the first one to do it. Roger Taylor had his album Fun in Space in 1981 and his second album Strange Frontier in 1984. Then you had Brian May with Eddie Van Halen on the Starfleet project in 1983, which was a small rock album based on a children's TV show. Then also in 1983, John Deacon co-produced a hip-hop single called Picking Up Sounds with Man Friday and Jive Jr.
Born on a Friday when the sky turned black, it's hard to grow up straight with the devil on your back, temptation everywhere.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Out of everyone in Queen, Freddie Mercury was the last one to go solo, but he gets the most flack for it in this movie.
I think most people thought that I would be the first one to have a solo album, and then the band would, Queen would break up and all that. But here you are, after 13 years, four old ladies are still rocking away.
Well, that about wraps it up for part 1 of my Bohemian Rhapsody review, and stay tuned for part 2 when it comes out next week. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching, History Buffs.